So after our reporting here on the MeidasTouch network that Donald Trump has refused to turn over his medical records relating to the shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania last week, on Saturday, Donald Trump had Ronny Jackson, who's not even a licensed physician anymore. His license expired. He had Ronny Jackson, the MAGA Republican congressman who's been in a lot of deep trouble for his personal behavior and conduct. He had Ronny Jackson release like a purported medical note, which has no credibility because he's not even licensed and it's on congressional letterhead. This raises additional red flags. Donald Trump gave a speech over the weekend. He spoke in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He had what looked to be like a tiny Band-Aid on his ear. Donald Trump also said things like, I took a bullet, for our democracy. And he also said some other sickening things, which I think it's important that we dig into what were the injuries, especially how it was reported. Trump talking more lightheartedly, he's joking now about the attempt on his life, where he apparently sounded somber at the convention, according to New York Times, which I don't think he did. Talking about the immigration chart he turned to look at before the bullets flew last week, he says, I owe immigration my life, an apt statement about his political career, and jokes about loving the chart so much I think I'm going to sleep with the chart, where he was talking about mass deportations. If you take a look at Ronny Jackson's letter that has zero credibility, what are the types of things that it says? He says things like, as the former appointed physician to the president for Donald Trump, I was naturally very concerned, as was the entire world, about his well-being after the assassination attempt. As such, I met with him in Bedminster, New Jersey, late that evening to personally check on him and offer my assistance in any way possible. I have been with President Trump since that time, and I have evaluated and treated his wound daily. He is doing well, as reported and witnessed by the entire world. He sustained a gunshot wound to the right ear from a high-powered rifle used by the would-be assassin. The bullet passed, coming less than a quarter of an inch from entering his head, and struck the top of his right ear. The bullet track produced a 2-centimeter wide wound that extended down the cartilage surface of the ear. There was initially significant bleeding, followed by marked swelling of the entire upper ear. The swelling has since resolved, and the wound is beginning to granulate and heal properly. Based on the highly vascular nature of the ear, there is still intermittent bleeding requiring dressing to be in place. Given the broad and blunt nature of the wound itself, no sutures, no stitches were required. The president was initially treated, his former president, by the medical staff at Butler Memorial Hospital in Butler, Pennsylvania, who did an excellent job evaluating him and treating his wound. I want to thank them. They provided a thorough evaluation for additional injuries, including a CT scan. He will follow up. In summary, Trump, former President Trump, there they say former, is doing well, and he is recovering as expected from the gunshot sustained last Saturday. I mean, as expected, if you're hit in the face with an AR-15 bullet and you don't require sutures at all, I mean, I think that's it's a legitimate question to ask, and I think it's also a legitimate question to say, why isn't any staff at the Butler Memorial Hospital here, the treating physicians, coming out with statements? Why do you have someone who's not even licensed anymore putting out these statements? And I think that has zero credibility. As Aaron Rupert says, Ronny Jackson does not have a medical license. He once said Trump would live to 200 years old. He was nicknamed Candyman when he worked in the White House for handing out pills without prescriptions. More on that in a moment. And then Aaron Rupert says, I'm taking this with a grain of salt. Here's just what the Dallas Morning News had previously reported, just so you know about Ronny Jackson's license, because I think it's important that we put out all the facts and data to support what we say. The former White House physician has no Texas medical license. His Virginia license expired more than 3 years ago, and his Florida license hasn't been valid since he retired from the Navy in 2019. though it wouldn't make it illegal or unethical to offer aid during an emergency. He had been board certified in emergency medicine since 2005, though a license is still required to practice medicine. So I think that's an important. Records from the American Board of Emergency Medicine show his certification expires at the end of 2025. I'm sure you've seen our prior reports here at the MeidasTouch Network about the White House under Donald Trump being turned into a pill mill while Ronny Jackson was kind of supervising it. They were giving out fentanyl in the White House, fentanyl patches. By the way, let me just put a little footnote there, if you will. You know how Donald Trump says, oh, migrants are bringing in fentanyl. Just to be clear, most of the fentanyl that comes in from this country comes in from American citizens. And just to also be clear, in terms of crimes committed by migrants versus American citizens have significantly higher crime rates than migrant crime rates. Just kind of the xenophobic rhetoric by Trump and MAGA. By the way, all crime should be condemned and dealt with seriously, but I think we need to address those xenophobic tropes. Okay, so at the White House, while Ronny Jackson was in charge, they were giving out, they called him the candy man for a reason. They were giving fentanyl and fentanyl patches. They were handing out Versed, which is the date rape drug. They were giving out ketamine. They were giving out tons of Adderall, Provigil. I mean, just take a look at this list of very serious types of drugs that were being handed out at the White House. That's from an Inspector General report that was prepared by the Department of Defense. And you can see that's just one of thousands of log sheets of the types of drugs that were handed out without any kind of accountability whatsoever there. It's Ronny Jackson. What we also know, and you saw in our prior report, that Donald Trump has a history of directing his doctors to write the notes. Trump tells the doctors what to say, and then they write it down. So remember Donald Trump's other doctor, Dr. Harold Bornstein, who's since passed away. Remember Donald Trump, while he was in office, sent his personal bodyguard, Keith Schiller, to raid the office to take the medical records from Dr. Harold Bornstein, Trump's former personal doctor. You don't have to believe me. Here's what Trump's former doctor, the late Harold Bornstein, said in 2018. Play this clip.
Exactly what they looking for?
All his medical records, his pictures, anything they could find. We must have been here for 25 or 30 minutes. It created a lot of chaos. I couldn't believe anybody was making a big deal about a drug that's to grow his hair, which seemed to be so important. And it certainly is not a breach of medical trust to tell somebody they take Propecia to grow their hair. What's the matter with that?
Yeah, so Trump sent people there to take the medical records. Also, Dr. Harold Bornstein at that time told CNN that his medical reports weren't actually his own diagnoses. Donald Trump would dictate it for him. Here, let me show you that so you can see it for yourself and hear it for yourself. Play the clip.
We ran into Dr. Harold Bornstein right outside his office on Park Avenue, and he told us in no uncertain terms, and this is the quote, Aaron, he being Trump, he dictated that whole letter. I didn't write that letter, meaning that Trump dictated what he wanted to go into it, and essentially Bornstein wrote it up. He did say, he compared it to the movie Fargo, and he said it takes the truth and moves it in a different direction. Think about that. Now, Bornstein tells us that he was in a car with his wife when he was on the phone with then candidate Trump in December of 2015. And she was going through with Trump what he could say and what he couldn't say. Trump was dictating what he wanted in that letter, and Bornstein was saying, okay, you can say that, you can't say that. He then came here to the office. He wrote it up. Trump's office later picked it up. He said around 4 p.m. Aaron, we have reached out to the White House, but we have not gotten a response.
All right, so that's pretty incredible in and of itself. You also now, Alex, Bornstein is saying he was, quote unquote, robbed of the president's medical files. He spoke to you particularly about this encounter. What did he tell you?
Right, so he is saying this is a raid. Bornstein is saying that he was robbed. I specifically asked him, was a crime committed? He said they stole them, referring to the president's medical files. The they in that sentence are two men under the president's employ. The first, as you mentioned, is Keith Schiller, who was the president's longtime bodyguard here in New York. He then moved down to Washington with the president, worked in the White House as the head of Oval Office operations. The other person we understand is Alan Garten, who is an attorney for the Trump Organization. Now, Aaron, normally when you have medical records released, you need what's called a HIPAA release. We understand from Bornstein, he told us this afternoon, that was not signed. Instead, he says these two men barged through the back door, terrified the secretary, pushed aside the patient who was in there. Now, the White House is not contesting that they took possession of these medical files, but they are saying that it was not a raid. Instead, Aaron, they're saying that this was just standard operating procedure. Aaron.
Because here are the types of medical notes that Dr. Bornstein provided for Trump. If elected, this was from 2015, and the media is like, lets him get away with it. If elected, Mr. Trump, I can state unequivocally, will be the healthiest individual ever elected to the presidency. I mean, that's so ridiculous. Like, and the last reporting from WPXI, the local Pittsburgh news network, said 11 Investigates has learned that 4 Pittsburgh police officers assigned to Trump's motorcade suffered minor injuries during the shooting. The 4 motorcycle officers were part of Trump's escort to and from the rally in Butler. Sources tell Chief Investigator Rick Earl the officers were just feet away from Trump when the shots rang out. The 4 officers suffered minor injuries from flying debris caused by the bullets. Sources say the officers were hit with either plastic or metal fragments when the bullets struck objects nearby. So the people right next to Donald Trump were not hit with the bullets. They were hit with plastic and metal fragments. And so, you know, the question is that if an AR-15 bullet hits you in the head or hits you in the ear, and it just leaves a nick where you don't need stitches. And by the way, there may be an explanation for that, but that's why in cases like this, the treating physician at Butler Memorial would come out with a statement so you can actually read it and see what's actually happening. And one of the reasons I bring this up too is because Donald Trump is grifting off of this now. Donald Trump is selling assassination edition sneakers, 5,000 limited stock, $299 each. He's autographed 10 of them. So if you get that, you can get the Trump signature on an assassination edition sneaker. This is real. You know, and then he's going out there and making statements saying that he took a bullet. And so, okay, if you're going to say things like that, then show the medical records and let the American people see. We know with Donald Trump's tax records, when he hid those and finally they were released, he didn't pay taxes. He paid $750 in taxes. There were years where he paid $0 in income tax, $0. You pay more money in income tax than someone who claims to be a billionaire. It's $750, the filing fee too, by the way, in the other years. Show it to you right there. So we demand transparency, and we at the MeidasTouch Network are going to be fearless, and we're not going to stop reporting on the red flags here and call it out. You don't have Dr. Ronny Jackson, the candy man, give you a personal doctor's note. He's not the right person to do that. And it raises more red flags. Tell me what you think in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's get to 3 million subscribers together.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.